That lesson from the Hebrew Scriptures is a fantastic story. I don't know if you leaned in like I do when I'm reading it, but I was again surprised by this story this week. I was glad it had come around, and in fact, I haven't preached on it, I don't think, ever here in this sanctuary. I've always been on vacation, just at the time that Moses gets born. And it is a fantastic story. And I was saying to friends last night, if you haven't seen The Prince of Egypt, the animated feature film that Spielberg put out many years ago, I really encourage you to watch The Prince of Egypt. Phone a kid that you know and ask them if they got a copy, and bring out your VCR and pop it in. It is well worth the watch, or you get it probably from the library. It really is one of the few films I've seen that really brings the drama in a great way and the sense of God's blessing to this story. I want to talk about the midwives this week. Anytime you hear about midwives in the Bible, you should pay attention, because midwives are always up to something. And they're always up to something that's on the side of life. And in that society, midwives are often seen as what we'd call wise women. You know, the Bible is littered with wise women. And I love to lift them up, either named or unnamed, as many times as I can. Because I just tell you, the wise women of the Bible run the show. They're so often, the whole history of Israel hinges on the words or the work of a wise woman, or the sneakiness, as we find out today. Shifra and Puah. Shifra means, what did I hear? Beautiful. Puah means splendid. Shifra and Puah. Beautiful and splendid. These two midwives. They also have names that kind of speak to the work they do. They're kind of earthy names. Shifra, Puah. They sound grounded. They're midwives. In Egypt, midwives to the Hebrew women. And these two midwives are brought before the Pharaoh. And he says, I want you to kill all the male children the Hebrew women have, right at the birth stool. The minute you see them, and so I just have this great image. Imagine this story of these two meager women who have never even been near the court, let alone in the front of the Pharaoh, and they're brought in, and he tells them what to do. The Hebrews have these midwives that are known to the Pharaoh, and he tells them, women who are about life only, about birthing, he says, murder now. But the midwives recognize God as the ultimate power in the world, not this madman, and they don't do what they're told. Reminds me of a great Cheyenne quote from Southern America, the southern part of the United States. The Cheyenne proverb is, a nation is not conquered until the hearts of its women are on the ground. A nation is not conquered until the hearts of its women are on the ground. These women refused to place their hearts on the ground, and their nation was not conquered. You see? This is the work of wise women, of midwives. They know the dirt of life. They know the blood of life. They know how messy birthing can be, God's creative practice. They've probably seen a lot scarier things than the Pharaoh in the birthing room. Why they've been yelled at, screamed at, grabbed onto in the midst of those birth pangs that are uncontrollable. Pharaoh, we'll take care of Pharaoh. So they come up with this idea. And he pulls them back in. And he says, why haven't you been killing these babies? You'd think it would be obvious. Because killing babies weren't really in our job profile when we signed up. We're midwives. Did you see our sign, our business card? Midwives. Birthers, not killers. But he still seems flabbergasted by this, which shows you how crazy this Pharaoh was. And he pulls them back and says, why haven't you done? Oh, they say, The Hebrew women are not like the gentle, soft Egyptian women. The Hebrew women are robust and healthy and vibrant. They pop those kids out faster than we can even get there. They hardly even need midwives. They're kind of talking themselves out of a job, to tell you the truth. Out those babies come. Bam. And the idea is they're hidden by then. We can't even tell if they're boys or girls that come out so fast. Bam. I love it. I love the story. They did great work. And then it gets better. Because there are more wise women in this story. And they team up. Miriam, we learn her name later, Moses' sister, has watched him being placed in the ark in the river. And he's in the reeds. And it says, and his sister stood by and watched. They must have been not strangers to the court. Miriam must have been a servant girl or something. Because why else would she be near the Pharaoh's daughter on that day? And so, when she speaks to the Pharaoh's daughter doesn't say, "Who are you?" She just speaks. I could get you a wet nurse for that baby from among the Hebrew women. And Pharaoh's daughter, that's a great idea. Go for it. And what does Miriam do? She gets Moses' mother. Oh, it's just brilliant. So Moses' mother gets to bring Moses up to age 4 or 5 or whatever age the Hebrew women stopped suckling their children. I don't know what age. Thought it was longer probably than ours is now. And then he would have gone, I can't imagine the heartbreak. They don't tell you this story about giving Moses back to the court. But he did live with his mother for a while. And then went back and grew up as a prince of Egypt. Because Miriam was a wise woman. Here's the quote that caught my imagination this week from Thomas Cahill, wrote a wonderful book called The Gifts of the Jews. He says this, "Thus the child is rescued from certain death by a silent conspiracy of women on the side of life." A silent conspiracy of women on the side of life. So that he can grow up as an Egyptian prince with a secret Jewish mother. A man who will understand the world of power and connections, but a man who has also been nursed at the breasts of kindness and love. The best of both worlds. The silent conspiracy of women on the side of life. The torment of men forever, in my mind. In the history of men who want power and authority and death, there has always been a silent conspiracy of women on the side of life forever. And it doesn't seem to be there's anything men can do about it. There's a news flash. I wondered this week, when have you ever found yourselves in a silent conspiracy on the side of life? Or a noisy conspiracy on the side of life? This is the kind of stuff we talk about at Easter time, but we need to talk about it all year round. Choosing life, not death, in the face of empire, in the face of Pharaoh, in the face of those who wish for power, those who wrongfully take power, those who misunderstand and think they have more power than they have. And by this, I just don't mean the people who have political power. I mean those who run social codes, the people who write magazines, the media, your friends who pressure you into being a certain way or this way. Or remember last week I took pokes at mothers. Could be your mother or your dad or your grandmother taught you this is the way we live. That's power and authority that so often needs to be challenged in my mind. You're not going to tell my mom this when she comes in October, of course. You should have heard what he said in August. When have you been part of a conspiracy for life? A conspiracy against death in our world, in our society. Was it civil disobedience, possibly? Are we willing to live that out in order to serve our God? What conspiracies are we invested in so that the powers of death don't rule? It's a little nerve-wracking to talk about this sort of stuff. If you mention civil disobedience in church, I'd say it probably loses about 75 to 80% of you. There's a few radicals over here who are just raring for it, always. Oh, you know who you are. Have you ever been part of an act of civil disobedience? Or a march, for that matter? How many of you have ever marched anywhere for something that you care about? Put your hands up. Let's see. You're not going to go to jail. Just a few of you. Just a few of you. It took me years. It just was a few years ago I finally walked down the street because the Cuts to Kairos, which does a lot of good work in Canada. I always stayed away from it. I've got a heart for justice, but I've always been nervous about that civil disobedience stuff. I've probably said this before, but I want to name it out loud again. I think many of us are worried about joining in movements of justice because of the anger attached to that justice movement so often. I think many of us would go to Idle No More activities if we thought that we weren't going to be attached to some sort of anger or possible violence, or be seen as one of those angry people. Or we'd be more involved in the environmental movement if we didn't think that people would think we're angry as well. Because there's always an element to civil disobedience or to rebellion or to speaking out against something that you care for. That's justice. Justice brings anger. Some people need anger to motivate their justice. That's fine. But far too often I find that the movements that catch fire, the movements you see on TV, the people working on the side of life and for justice, many of them bring their own personal anger and just attach it to the issue. You know? And that's always kind of made me a little nervous. But I'm finding I have to put that aside. And I want us all to put that aside. Because if we're clear about what we're doing, where we're doing it, and why, it doesn't matter what other people are like. That's a big deal. If we know what we care about, if we know why we care about it, we can do things. Now, of course, marches aren't the only way to choose life. I'd love us to dream this week about conspiracies. Our own, not the conspiracies about did they walk on the moon or not. Not that kind of stuff. Dream up our own conspiracies. Is there something that you really, really care about? Something that's going wrong in the world, that's filled with power and authority and death dealing, that you wish would be different, but have no idea how to get at it? Oh, I got a list as long as my arms. Church is where we should be talking about that stuff with each other and find ways. It doesn't have to be the typical ways. I think we're kind of caught in a 60s mentality. You get a bunch of people together, you walk with placards, that's all you can do. There are many other ways. I was thinking about joining Amnesty International again. You know, get blacklisted by the United States government. I love it. It's just letter writing. And I brought that up to a friend the other day who I never really thought much radical guy, and he said, I used to belong to Amnesty too. I should get back into that. I'm like, really? Just writing letters about political prisoners. People living out their belief about what life should look like, and they get arrested. I should join that again. There's so many different ways. But we won't find those ways. We won't find the ways to be in conspiracy with each other for life, for God's life, if we don't talk to one another about what we really care about what we're at our wits' end about what we just have no sense how to, what can we do? We don't throw up our hands together and say, I feel stuck on this one. We'll never get wisdom from each other. We'll never hear the Spirit of God in our hearts that comes through community. Like Puah and Shiphrah getting together and saying, now what are we going to tell Pharaoh? They stay up all night long and they keep the wicks burning. And they think, I know, we'll tell him the Hebrew, because Pharaoh's never going to get close to a Hebrew woman in birth. He's not going to know. I can't tell you how much danger they put their lives in. Just because it's a story from the Bible doesn't mean you can ignore the real tension of the story. Shiphrah and Puah put their lives in danger and had to go back in front of the Pharaoh in his madman anger. And they risked everything to be on the side of life, on God's side. How is it that Mayfair United Church can be midwives for this world, birthing good life, new life, in a world racked with inappropriate power and authority? How can we get together in conversation, in idea sharing, in heart sharing? I just still get the feeling there's people you sit next to every week, you have no idea what they really care about. We need to get together and turn to one another and say, you know what really burns me this week? Tina Fontaine's death in Winnipeg. That's what really burns me this week. Brings me to tears. And how many of us will just say, oh, missing children, missing women and children, that's their issue. We don't know what to do. How many of us just move on? Because we just don't know what to do. It paralyzes us. There's lots we can do. We're the ones in power in that situation. There's tons we can do. Doesn't have to look like what Facebook says it looks like. Doesn't have to be a march. Could be a letter. Could be a conversation. Could be coffee row. Could be many, many things. Prayer groups. Praying for Tina and her family and all those 1,200 women missing. Praying for the police forces of our cities. Praying for the Prime Minister. Get his head screwed on right about this issue. There's so many ways we could be midwives, choosing the side of life in a world that sometimes is so awfully wrong.